He was charming, handsome, a photographer with an easy smile. In 1978, he even won a spot on the popular TV show, The Dating Game. But behind his charming exterior lurked one of America's most sadistic serial killers. His name was Rodney Alcala, and his story is far darker than anything Hollywood could ever script. Tonight, we unravel the chilling double life of Rodney Alcala, a man who lived as a photographer, charmer, and game show contestant, but secretly stalked, tortured, and killed. This is the story of how he manipulated everyone around him, how he evaded justice for decades, and how his legacy still terrifies investigators today. Rodney James Alcala was born on August 23, 1943, in San Antonio, Texas. The youngest of 4 children, his early life seemed unremarkable. But when Rodney was only 12, his father abandoned the family, leaving behind a fractured home and a boy who would soon learn how to manipulate, deceive, and control. After the abandonment, Rodney's mother moved the family to Los Angeles. It was there, in the sprawling streets of California, that Rodney's charm began to take shape. Teachers and classmates described him as intelligent, sometimes even gifted. But beneath that intelligence was something darker, a lack of empathy, a hunger for control, and the beginnings of the man who would later be called the dating game killer. In 1960, at just 17, Rodney enlisted in the United States Army. He was assigned as a clerk, not a fighter. But even in uniform, Alcala couldn't escape the cracks forming in his mind. By 1964, he went absent without leave, disappearing into the streets. When military police finally caught up with him, Rodney was sent to a psychiatrist. The evaluation was chilling: severe personality disorder. The Army discharged him on medical grounds, labeling him unfit for service. For most young men, this would have been a wake-up call. But for Alcala, it was simply the beginning. Now he was free, untethered, unstable, and already showing signs of what would come. By the mid-1960s, Alcala was back in Los Angeles. Outwardly, he appeared like any other young man of the era: fashionable, charismatic, someone you might trust instantly. But in 1968, his mask slipped for the first time. An 8-year-old girl named Tali Shapiro was walking to school when Alcala spotted her. He pulled over, smiled, and convinced the little girl to accept a ride. What happened next was unspeakable. Rodney lured her into his Hollywood apartment, where he brutally assaulted her. He might have killed her that day, but fate intervened. A passing motorist saw the girl get into Alcala's car and called the police. Officers arrived just in time, forcing their way into the apartment. Inside, they found a scene of horror. Tali was lying on the floor, severely beaten. Somehow, she survived. But Rodney? He was gone. He had fled out the back door. Rodney Alcala was now a fugitive. He was placed on the FBI's most wanted list, but with no digital surveillance, no internet, and no nationwide DNA database. Catching him would be like chasing a ghost. Changing his name, changing his look, Alcala slipped through the cracks. He knew how to exploit the system, and he would use that knowledge to keep killing. By the early 1970s, Alcala resurfaced in New York City under the alias John Berger. Here, he enrolled at New York University's film school, where he studied under none other than Roman Polanski. To those around him, he was quiet, talented, and ambitious. But in reality, Alcala was a predator hiding in plain sight. He carried a camera everywhere, convincing young women to pose for him. He claimed it was for his portfolio, but investigators now believe many of those photographs weren't just art. They were trophies. In New York, Alcala's appetite grew. He stalked women in Central Park, on college campuses, and in clubs. His charm was disarming. People described him as funny, approachable, even trustworthy. But once he had someone alone, the facade would collapse. Investigators believe that during this period, Alcala committed several murders in New York. In 1971, he was linked to the murder of Cornelia Crilly, a flight attendant found strangled in her apartment. At the time, the case went cold. Decades later, DNA would finally connect Alcala to her death. It was a deadly pattern that would repeat itself: charm, lure, kill, and disappear. After years in New York, Alcala moved back to California. Once again, he reinvented himself, this time as a professional photographer. To aspiring models, his pitch sounded legitimate. He would photograph them for free, help them build a portfolio, and maybe even connect them to agencies. But in truth, Alcala's camera wasn't a gateway to fame. It was bait. He wasn't chasing art. He was chasing victims. By the mid-1970s, Rodney Alcala had perfected his double life. To friends, he was funny, talented, and handsome. To strangers, he was a promising photographer. To law enforcement, he was a ghost, an escaped predator slipping between states and identities. But soon, his need for attention and control would lead him to do something almost unthinkable for a serial killer: step into the spotlight of national television. The predator was about to take the stage on the dating game. September 1978. Television audiences tuned in to one of America's most popular shows, The Dating Game. The concept was simple. A bachelorette would question 3 eligible bachelors, hidden from view, and, at the end, she'd choose one for a date. It was supposed to be harmless fun. But what the audience didn't know was that one of the contestants, a man with a charming smile and quick wit, was already a monster. When host Jim Lang introduced Bachelor Number 1, the audience erupted in applause. He was tall, dark-haired, confident. His name, Rodney Alcala. To the cameras, Alcala was playful, charming. He teased, flirted, and delivered quick answers that got laughs. The bachelorette that night was Cheryl Bradshaw, a 30-year-old actress looking for romance. But even on camera, Alcala's darkness showed through. When Cheryl asked what he was like, he answered with disturbing humor. "I'm kind of banana. Peel me." The audience laughed, but watching today, the comment feels chilling. Against the odds, Cheryl Bradshaw chose Rodney Alcala as her match. But behind the scenes, something happened that would save her life. When producers told Cheryl she would soon go on a date with Rodney, she balked. Cheryl later explained, "He gave me the creeps. I started to feel ill when I was around him." She refused to go out with him. It was an instinct that may have saved her life. Because at the very time Alcala was smiling for TV cameras, he was also in the middle of a killing spree. For years, Alcala had been living a double life. By day, he was the charming photographer, a friend to artists, a contestant on game shows. By night, he stalked women and girls across California and New York. He lured his victims with promises of modeling opportunities, only to trap them in secluded areas. Once alone, his violence was brutal: strangulation, beating, and in some cases, torture. Investigators would later say Alcala enjoyed playing a death game. He would strangle his victims until they lost consciousness, then revive them, only to repeat the process again. For Alcala, it wasn't just about killing. It was about control, suffering, and dominance. Between 1977 and 1979, Alcala's crimes escalated. Investigators believe he murdered at least 5 women during this period, though the real number could be far higher. His confirmed California victims included Jill Barkham, an 18-year-old runaway, found murdered in Los Angeles in 1977. Georgia Wickstead, a 27-year-old nurse, killed in Malibu in 1977. Charlotte Lamb, a 32-year-old woman found strangled in a laundry room in 1978. Jill Parento, a 21-year-old student, murdered in her apartment in 1979. Robin Samso, a 12-year-old girl abducted on her way to ballet class in June 1979. Each case revealed the same disturbing pattern: strangulation, posed bodies, and often Alcala's photographs nearby. But it was the murder of Robin Samso that would finally bring Alcala's killing spree to light. On June 20th, 1979, Robin, a bright and cheerful 12-year-old, disappeared while walking to ballet class in Huntington Beach. Friends later told police they had seen her talking to a man with a camera, tall and handsome, asking if he could take her picture. 12 days later, Robin's remains were found in the Sierra Madre foothills. The brutality shocked investigators. This wasn't just murder. It was predation. Witnesses worked with police to create a composite sketch. The face looked hauntingly familiar. It matched Rodney Alcala. Police arrested Alcala in July 1979. When they searched his storage locker, what they found was horrifying. Hundreds of photographs of women and children, many of them unidentified. Some of the women in those photos were later confirmed as murder victims. Others remain unidentified to this day. The photographs were trophies, a twisted catalog of Alcala's conquests. Detectives now believe they had their killer, but bringing him to justice would prove far more complicated than anyone imagined. By 1980, Rodney Alcala stood trial for the murder of Robin Samsoe. Prosecutors painted him as a sadistic killer who lured, tortured, and murdered without remorse. But Alcala wasn't finished playing games. Representing himself in court, he cross-examined witnesses, including, at times, speaking in a calm, almost smug tone. It was a chilling display. A killer questioning his own survivors, using the courtroom as a stage. The jury was horrified, but this was only the beginning of a decades-long legal battle that would span trials, appeals, and retrials, while new evidence continued to emerge. In 1980, just a year after Robin Samsoe's murder, Rodney Alcala stood trial for the crime. Prosecutors presented evidence tying him directly to Robin's disappearance and death. Witnesses identified him as the man seen photographing young girls near the beach. The evidence was strong. The jury deliberated, and Alcala was convicted of Robin Samsoe's murder. He was sentenced to death. But Alcala's story was far from over. In 1984, the California Supreme Court overturned his conviction, ruling that jurors had been improperly informed of his past crimes. It was a devastating setback. Robin Samsoe's family, who thought justice had been served, now faced the possibility that her killer might escape punishment. 2 years later, in 1986, Alcala was retried for Robin's murder. Once again, prosecutors laid out the case. Once again, the jury convicted him. And once again, Alcala was sentenced to death. But unbelievably, history repeated itself. In 2001, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals overturned the conviction yet again, citing procedural errors. For decades, Alcala played the legal system like a chessboard. He filed appeals, challenged rulings, and exploited technicalities. Each time, the families of his victims were forced to relive the horror. One prosecutor later described it as justice delayed to the point of cruelty. Alcala was a convicted killer, but his death sentence never seemed permanent. By the time of his third trial in 2010, Alcala made a shocking decision. He would act as his own attorney. What followed was bizarre, chilling, and unforgettable. Alcala questioned witnesses, addressed the jury, and even conducted a strange back-and-forth with himself, switching voices as though he were both the lawyer and the accused. At one point, he asked himself aloud, "Did you commit the murder of Robin Samsoe?" Then, in a deeper voice, he answered, "No, I did not." The performance stunned the courtroom. It was part spectacle, part psychological horror show. But by 2010, Robin Samsoe's case was not the only one on the table. Thanks to advances in DNA technology, prosecutors had linked Alcala to 4 additional murders from the late 1970s. Jill Barkham, 18. Georgia Wickstead, 27. Charlotte Lamb, 32. Jill Parento, 21. The evidence was irrefutable. DNA found at crime scenes matched Alcala. His decades-long reign of terror was finally catching up with him. After months of testimony, the jury delivered its decision. Rodney Alcala was convicted of 5 murders: Robin Samsoe, Jill Barkham, Georgia Wickstead, Charlotte Lamb, and Jill Parento. This time, there would be no reversal. The jury sentenced him to death for a third time. But Alcala's legacy was not confined to California. Evidence now tied him to murders far beyond the state's borders. In 2012, New York authorities announced Alcala had been indicted for 2 cold cases from decades earlier. The victims were Cornelia Crilly, a 23-year-old flight attendant murdered in Manhattan in 1971, and Ellen Hover, a 23-year-old socialite who vanished in 1977. Ellen Hover's disappearance was particularly shocking. She was the daughter of Hollywood nightclub owner Herman Hoover, and her godparents were Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. She disappeared after agreeing to meet a photographer, Rodney Alcala. Alcala pleaded guilty to the New York murders. His plea spared the families a lengthy trial, but the details were haunting. Once again, a predator had struck under the guise of a photographer, luring young women into a trap they would never escape. By now, Alcala's confirmed victim count was 7. But investigators believe the real number was far higher, possibly in the dozens. In 2010, police released hundreds of Alcala's photographs to the public. They hoped someone might recognize the women and children depicted. The images were haunting, women posing, smiling, sometimes uncomfortable, sometimes trusting. Some of the women came forward, alive, thankful to have escaped. But others were never identified. Detectives feared many of them were dead, their bodies never found. To this day, dozens of those faces remain mysteries, frozen in time by Alcala's camera. By the time his trials ended, Rodney Alcala had become one of America's most infamous serial killers. His ability to hide in plain sight, appearing on television, charming strangers, taking photographs, made his crimes all the more disturbing. He was a man who lived for the game, the hunt, the deception, and the endless taunting of the justice system. But Alcala's story didn't end in the courtroom. His case left behind a chilling legacy about trust, about predators hiding in plain sight, and about the dangers of charisma used for evil. After his 2010 conviction, Rodney Alcala was transferred to California's death row at San Quentin State Prison. For the first time in decades, there were no more appeals left, no more retrials to manipulate. But even behind bars, Alcala remained a figure of fascination and horror. Other inmates avoided him. Guards described him as cold, calculating, and completely devoid of remorse. By the mid-2010s, Alcala's health began to deteriorate. He suffered from multiple chronic illnesses, including cancer. The once flamboyant dating game contestant was now a frail man in a wheelchair, his charisma stripped away. But his crimes were never forgotten. Each year, detectives revisited the unsolved cases they believed he might be tied to. Law enforcement agencies across the country kept digging. DNA technology had already tied him to multiple victims, but there were still hundreds of unsolved murders from the 1970s and 80s that fit his pattern. The photographs found in his storage locker were re-released to the public in 2016. Families of missing women scoured them, hoping for answers. Some faces were identified. Many were not. To this day, investigators believe Alcala may have killed as many as 130 people, though the true number will never be known. On July 24, 2021, Rodney Alcala died at the age of 77. His cause of death was listed as natural causes, though his failing health had long signaled the end was near. He had spent more than 4 decades in prison, most of it on death row, without ever facing execution. For many, his death brought a strange sense of closure. For others, it was yet another frustration that the justice system had allowed him to live out his final years, while his victims never had the chance. But even in death, Alcala's legacy remained tied to one bizarre and haunting detail: his appearance on the dating game. Clips of his show, once seen as harmless fun, took on a sinister quality in hindsight. Audiences re-watched with horror, seeing how close he came to charming his way into another victim's life, right on national television. That eerie footage continues to resurface online, a chilling reminder of how easily monsters can hide in plain sight. For the families of Robin Samso, Jill Barkham, Charlotte Lamb, Georgia Wixted, Jill Parento, Cornelia Crilly, and Ellen Hover, Alcala's death did not erase decades of grief. But it did mark the end of a chapter. No more appeals. No more headlines. Their loved ones' names, once buried in unsolved files, are now forever tied to the man who killed them, but also remembered as lives tragically cut short. Experts have long debated what drove Rodney Alcala. Some argue he was a classic psychopath, charming, manipulative, with no empathy. Others saw him as a sadist who enjoyed not just killing, but the act of prolonging suffering. His photography obsession suggested something even darker, a need to capture his victims, to freeze their vulnerability in time as trophies of his power. Rodney Alcala's story is more than a tale of one killer. It is a warning about trust, about predators who blend into society, and about how easily charm can mask cruelty. It's also a lesson in the flaws of justice, how decades of appeals allowed a confessed predator to evade true punishment for far too long. In the end, Rodney Alcala will forever be remembered not for the game show he once won, but for the deadly game he played with human lives. His victims are the names that matter, the lives that should be remembered, and his story serves as a chilling reminder. Sometimes, the most dangerous people are the ones who smile the brightest. Thank you for watching this documentary on Rodney Alcala, the so-called dating game killer. If you found this story important, help keep these victims' memories alive by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with others who follow true crime. And remember, evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like the person smiling next to you.